Hi, today we're going to talk about understanding character, point of view, and perspective with me, Miss Freund. Throughout this video, what I really want you honestly to feel as if you have a clarification of if it's a new concept or a review is one, what counts as a character? Two, what are direct and indirect character traits? What do those terms even mean? Three, what is point of view in a story? And four, what is a character's perspective? The first thing may be like an obvious concept, but what exactly qualifies as a character in a story? The reason that we even think about this at the 7th grade level is because sometimes people or humans or forces can show up in a story and they're actually kind of more minor than major, but like, how do we know what's a character? How do we know what's a piece of the setting? How do we know what is like an environmental force? Is society a character? Sometimes we can kind of get lost in like what qualifies as one. A character is a person, an animal, a plant, an object, whatever it may be that talks or thinks in a story, behaves, is part of the conflict, is part of the setting, is part of the scene, and in some capacity contributes towards that overall arc of the story. It can also be a force like the storm that shook everyone, right? Sometimes we can think of things that are maybe a little bit more invisible, but they are integral to the conflict of the story. You could also think of things like at large, like society or a group of people like the Greasers being a character. I've got some images here that kind of are visuals that contribute towards that definition. So what is the difference between these terms characterization and character traits? You might see these terms, and you will see these terms as you continue to take literature classes over the years. When something is characterized, that means it's the way that they, meaning a character, is crafted by the author. Crafted meaning like the way that they are written. If it's a movie, maybe it's the way that the cinematographer or the director decided to have them come across. We can maybe understand the author more sometimes by how they decide to characterize. And if you continue to learn more about critical lens, that will be sort of where you focus on that characterization part. Character traits are the adjectives, whether direct or indirect, that an author gives to those characters. So let's talk more about character traits as I cover up the meme real quick with my image. Direct versus indirect traits is a lot of what we talk about in 7th grade, and direct traits means that it's how we see or hear the author describe a character directly on the page. Like, for example, if you read a sentence, the tall man was very nice, the adjectives we see right there, tall, nice, man, all direct traits. Indirect traits are kind of the ones that are take a little bit more brain work to figure out. An indirect trait of a character are qualities about them that we could infer, meaning we pick up on those traits based off of how they are described, how you sort of like read in between the lines and you see the character act, right? You see them behave in their environment. You see the way that they treat people. You see the way that they talk about things, they behave, they interact with others. And all of those behaviors, a lot of times, or the ways that other people describe them are those indirect traits. For example, the sentence, she stole money often from her parents when they weren't looking. Well, the sentence doesn't say she's sneaky. It doesn't say she's dishonest, but you could pick up those indirect traits because of her behaviors. Now, if you want to give it a try, you could think about good old grandma. Every time my old sweet grandma comes over to our house, she brings lots and lots of presents to share. If you want to like pause this and take a moment to figure out a direct and indirect trait. A direct trait might be grandma is old and she's sweet. We see that right away. You could say an indirect trait is she's really generous. She brings lots and lots of presents. You could also maybe say that she doesn't really like being at home because she likes to come over all the time, whatever that is. So direct is on the page, and indirect are traits that you pick up on because of the way that they behave and things that you can just sort of like learn about them over time. What is the difference then between point of view and perspective? And the reason that this is included in character work is because oftentimes characters, we get perspectives and angles on characters because of who's telling the story, right? And a lot of times it's the protagonist, maybe, who's telling that first person narrative. A point of view is who is narrating, whose brain are we inside? And the perspective is how that character who's talking in that moment, or maybe whose brain we get let into, is seeing something. There can be multiple point of views in a story. I love books for instance, that often have like kind of switch between different characters who are like letting us into how they see things, right? So the point of view is essentially who is narrating, whose brain we're inside, and the perspective is how they see things. I think it's good to kind of differentiate and understand the difference between those two things. So just for visualization, to practice point of view and perspective, let's imagine Joanna is telling her mom and dad about how her younger brother broke her cell phone yesterday, right? Now, Joanna's talking, right? And she's telling how things went down to her parents about her younger brother. Perhaps his name is like Miles or something. In her story, she goes on and on about how it was totally Miles's fault and how he should buy her a new one. So whose point of view are we getting in this version of the story? We're getting Joanna. She's talking, she's telling her version. What is that character's perspective? Well, Joanna is clearly saying that it's Miles's fault, that he's the one who broke the phone. Would we imagine that if Miles's point of view was being told, that he might have a different perspective on things, the way things went down? Probably, right? So we have to consider when we're reading a story, we only really have the angle that we are able to see through, right? And so sometimes it helps us kind of like predict or have fun with it and say, man, if it was from this point of view, how would I see things? You don't have to read through this entire slide right now, but essentially the reason I'm including this slide is that when you are tracking character throughout a story, and I know this is kind of a wordy slide, but essentially when you're tracking character throughout a story, you're first just meeting one or two characters at a time. Depends on the book and the story, obviously. When you're meeting a character for the first time, just like in real life, you often take in those direct character traits. And then you will learn more about those characters as you move through a story. And you see how they behave throughout conflict. You see how they behave both by themselves and then around people. Usually about halfway through a book, you might start to see some contradiction. You might start to see them behave in ways that you didn't like see them behave in the beginning of the book. A lot of times that's because they're evolving as a human, or they're growing, or they are sometimes just the author wants to put a little spice into the book and have them contradict how they've always acted. And then basically by the end of the book, you want to ask yourself, what have we learned the most through this character? How has this character, whether major or minor, evolved and been really integral in the big life lessons of this piece? So, if you need any clarification about character and you choose to sort of move forward with a book and talking about character and tracking character, hopefully these slides will allow you, as you revisit them, to kind of remember what it is that you need to be noticing, both really surfacey at the beginning of a story, and as you move forward, what you need to be diving into and investigating. A lot of times when you track character, you just choose one or two characters to really attract, to dive deeply into understanding. If you have any clarifications, ask me in person or over email. You are amazing. Bye.